In this episode, we're going to wet sand, the gas tank. Welcome to Urban Monk TV. Okay, so the way I've got this camera angle, you can see how the paint does not lay down perfectly flat. It's bumpy. And we've got to get this flat before clear coating. So really rough, crude drawing here, but essentially this is our paint laid down. And it doesn't lay down flat, so by taking a very, very fine grit of sandpaper, we can, flatten this out without, my drawing is not so good, without getting down in the valleys to the point where we get to the primer below. And we're going to do that slowly and with wet sanding. So as we sand, the water that's on the sandpaper is going to carry away the sanded particles of paint, and we can keep rinsing that away. And the wonderful thing is it's not a dusty process. Okay, so what are we going to use? We've got two different grits of wet or dry sandpaper. We're going to start with 1500 grit, and then we'll move to 2000 grit and get an ever smoother surface as we go. And I mentioned we are wet sanding, so I've just got water here. There is no soap in this, just straight up water. And I know I've mentioned it before, but we do not want to sand with our bare hand because we'll actually get an uneven surface if we do that. Again, because I mentioned it in a previous video, but not here. With your hand, there's this tendency a lot of times to think, well, that's kind of spongy and I'll be able to get an even surface, but honestly you won't if you use your bare hand. It's better to have a foam block. And so what I've done is I've got one of these cheap Harbor Freight foam blocks that has a much more aggressive grit on it. As I've been sanding primer, I've just been wrapping other grits of paper around this. But the layer that the grit on this is adhered to gives this thing a stiffness. And for the work that I'm doing now, I don't want this quite so stiff. So I'm going to just carve away that layer and get myself something smaller. And get down to the softer foam. Any of you who have filleted fish should have a pretty good technique for that. Not too bad. It's a lot softer now. Another thing you're going to want for this is really good light. Because I've got a bit of a garage studio out here, I've got a big studio light, and so I've got that benefit, but I still have all my garage lights on too. I'm up early, the sun is not up yet, but we may, in the term of this video, move outside just for the light, because I need the light to really see my surface. It's part my eyes and it's part your tactile feel on your fingers. And then I've just put a drip tray under there because we're going to have a lot of paint particle filled water dripping down. And I guess you could do that on your garage floor if you care. I don't want to clean it up later, so the drip tray's underneath. And so just like when we were painting, we want to pay attention in our mind to sections. Let's first start maybe around here, and then I'll do this top, and then I'll move to this side, And just take it one section at a time, and don't try to attack the whole thing at once. And so I've got my sandpaper, I got my foam block, and down here I've got the water that I'll just be dipping in over and over. Another good thing about cutting away a layer of that foam is this sandpaper is a little bit shorter than the length of that foam block, and if I had the original grit still on that foam, well, that's a more aggressive grit, and I'd be putting scratches into my paint that I don't want. So another good reason to get rid of it. Frankly, I could cut a little bit more of this off, which I think I'm going to do. Just make sure you don't have any big particles of something that may have settled on the paint that could potentially scratch it. Because while this sandpaper will be there, if that particle gets between the sandpaper and this, well, then you're just going to run that particle around and make a scratch. So I just want to make sure I'm clean before I get in here. I also may want to take this ring off. Be careful. So I'll dip this in water, get my eye at a point where it's reflecting off of that light, and I can just see all the little bumps here, and I'll get to work. Little circular motions. It doesn't seem initially like it's doing very much, or that it's cutting anything at all. But as you take your sandpaper, here, there's the water, and you can see that it is removing the paint. And so, again, that water is definitely removing paint. So another thing that I'm paying attention to as I do this is, as I start here on a new surface, I can hear kind of a grinding almost. I don't know how to describe it any better than that. And I can feel resistance. But as I keep doing it, like if I go up here to a section I've already done, there's less sound and there's less resistance. It's gliding like I'm on a sheet of ice. And so I'm paying attention to that sound and that feel. And that's when I know I've flattened it out. Try to capture this. So here I'm looking at a section that is not yet fully sanded, and you see the bumpiness. But as I move up toward an area that is sanded, you'll see the difference. I still have slight valleys in there, so I've got some work to do, but I am cutting it down and flattening it. So, as I'm so fond of doing out here in the garage, I'm thinking a bit about matters of the spirit. And if you follow my channel at all, you realize that I'm kind of into this idea that the garage is a wonderful place for a person to center the soul and calm the mind. It's a practice, it's a meditation of sorts. This is art, and a couple of really, I think, wonderful quotes that apply here. First, it comes from a really smart woman named Dr. Brene Brown. You look her up, see what she studied. She's an academic of a spiritual kind, which is an interesting Very interesting person. The quote I'm thinking of is, "Unused creativity is not benign, it metastasizes." So think about that. And the other one that I love comes from an actor from The Office, Rainn Wilson. And he says, there is no difference between art and prayer. So what am I doing out here in the garage? Am I building a motorcycle? Or is this act of creativity me expressing myself in a much higher level than just simply building a motorcycle? Is this me being, I think a lot of people might say, closer to God? Whatever you picture in your mind is God. It's like just like an ice rink when you get it flat. So smooth. This is fun. Keep the surface clean. There's little things that tend to want to pop up, and you don't want to drag around something sharp. Little shinier. Many steps to go. So here's after the 1500. Moving on to 2000. And now I'm switching to the 2000 grit. And we'll do it all again. This won't take quite as long though. So I've got it cut down pretty good. On this color layer, you don't have to get it perfectly flat quite yet, because you will get, the clear coat will fill in some. Whoa, what have I got on there? Different sandpaper, please. Ooh. Okay, I figured out what I did there. I took what looked like a brand new piece of 2000 grit, but it wasn't brand new. I had been using it on aluminum when I was doing the engine parts. So careful. We want to start with a brand new sheet. So let's try that again. I wiped it off very quickly. So all it was essentially aluminum dust. Not a big deal. Let me test here. Yeah, this is clean. So I still have some aluminum dust though in that paint there now. We'll wash that out. Okay, we're getting there. I'll give you a close-up here. Again, we don't need perfection at this stage. We're just trying to flatten out a bit, because the clear coat will fill in some. But we've been at this, I would say it was about 45 minutes that I sanded with the 1500, and then maybe 20 minutes with the 2000. Just for your reference. Different size tank and maybe a different brand of sandpaper, who knows, it may be different. You could also, like a body shop, get a random orbital buffer and make quicker work of this, I suppose, but it's such a small piece, and usually those buffers have such a big head on them that it seems like overkill here. And again, there's just something kind of centering and calming about doing it by hand. So different benefits. Let me show you this surface closer. So each time we look at this, the reflection of my studio light gets a little more clear. So I think what I'll try to do is maintain this angle as I do this, even as I spill over into other videos. And maybe I can put these together into kind of a montage of ever-growing clarity. But I'm feeling pretty good about this right now. So now I've replaced my paint-filled water with clean water with a little bit of dish soap, and I'm back to my microfiber towel, and I'm just going to clean all of the paint dust that remains on this tank off right now. Just wipe it down. Looking pretty good. Not perfect. Who wants perfect? Perfection is, frankly, here's one for you to think about. Perfection is fear-based. Chew on that till next episode. So I've got the water and the sandpaper going here, and right around this area I've got this piece of metal that is welded, spot welded into the tank, and I've gotten water now back inside of this, and I've tried to dry it out as best I can, and of course I put that rust treatment in there, but I still have moisture that's trapped down in here. I'm done sanding in this area, so I'm just gonna quickly take my heat gun on the low setting, and I'm just gonna warm this up. I don't want to torch my paint, but I want to warm this up enough to get that water to evaporate out of there quickly. So, you know, if I can hold my hand there, that's probably good enough. So it's just warm to the touch, and it's a little heat energy to start that evaporation and get that water out of there before I've got a problem. So we're running out of time here a bit today. Got a couple of spots after the tank is all dried that I could see I've just got to do a little bit more sanding effort in these spots to get it as smooth as elsewhere. So little quick tape, and next weekend when I come back to this thing, I'll remember exactly where I got to focus my attention, and then we can get to work on stripes. So our neighbor's got his weed whacker going, but that's going to be a wrap for this week. We have completed the sanding of the color layer. Next up then for that tank is clear coat, and then back to sanding clear coat. So clear coat gets cut down flat the same way that the color did, but with the clear coat it's going to be even more important, and we'll end up doing more sanding with that. So we're going to get a fantastic finish out of this cheap rattle can enamel paint from Rust-Oleum. I feel it sounds like I'm endorsing them now. I just think it works pretty good. So thanks for watching. If you guys like what I'm doing, click the thumbs up and subscribe if you want updates, and leave your comments. I try to respond to everybody, and well, I do respond to everybody that leaves comments, and for those of you that have, I really appreciate it. I love the interaction. I love how this is a community, and I feel like we're building this bike together. So it's cool stuff. Thanks for watching.